that the Rebbe gave us Chassidish glasses. And Chassidish glasses means that you look at the world with the presumption that the Eibishter is running it, and there's a certain optimism. So when you look at the world and you see what's happening, you interpret it as Yad Hashem. Unfortunately, for some of us, the effects of Gimel Tammuz is that we forgot that voice. So we become what's called realistic. You understand? We start to listen to what the world is saying. And the world is always going to be pessimistic. That's the nature of the world. So it's not that we're looking at a different world. We're looking at it through different eyes. Anyway, so how is in the 9th tag? In the Bein HaMitzorim. Not just in the Bein HaMitzorim, but in the Tishas HaYomim. This year, it's in Halacha, it's the shortest of the 9 days. You know why? Because Tisha B'Av itself is Shabbos. So Shavua Shechol Bei Tisha B'Av doesn't really happen, right? We know of 9 days. But 9 days is really a Chumrah. In Halacha, in the Mishnah, and in the Halacha, it doesn't speak about 9 days. It says Shavua Shechol Bei Tisha B'Av, the week in which Tisha B'Av falls. There is no Shavua Shechol Bei Tisha B'Av, because Tisha B'Av is on Shabbos. So Tisha B'Av we fast on Sunday. So this is sort of as 9 days go, it's a gringa 9 tag. It's Negeel Halacha L'Maisa. Not that we make any distinctions, but it's Negeel Halacha L'Maisa. But there's one thing is for sure, that the Rebbe did speak about the word from the Rebbe Marash, which is based on the Gemara, that Kiven the Itcha Yidocha Legamri. You know this, that according to Rabbeinu HaKadosh, according to Rabbi, when a fast falls on Shabbos, you don't fast. Period. Rabbi. Right? The Rebbe Yomer, you don't fast. In other words, if you look at the world from the perspective of a Rebbe, when a fast falls on a Shabbos, you don't fast. Now the halacha is not like Rebbe, because the people argued with Rebbe. But from the perspective of Rebbe, when a fast falls on Shabbos, you don't fast. And of course the Rebbe explained why. Because every fast has 2 components. It has the component of tshuva. That's really how you understand it. The Rambam doesn't say we fast to suffer. He doesn't say that. The Rambam says we fast as tshuva. Because every fast day is considered an Eis Ratzon. Fast days are considered Yemei Ratzon. Which is why when Mashiach comes, we don't just say that the fast days are abolished, but that the fast days become Yomim Tevim. Because fast days are Yemei Ratzon. Right? Shafach, Apa, Eleitzim, Alavanim. Whatever the particulars are, every time the Eibishter punished Yidden, it's called Av. It's called Menachem Av. Right? The Eibishter who punishes is called a father, right? To punish, you have to be called a father. A stranger who punishes is not punishing, he's a nachzar, he's a Rosh HaMerusha. The punishment can only come from a father. That's how it is. That's how it is. So when the Eibishter gives us Gvura, it's coming from his being an Av. So L'asad Laveh, the fast days become Yomim Tevim. So why are we fasting? We're fasting because there's a tshuva. We're correcting whatever was done wrong, so that L'asad Laveh, we should reveal the Eibishter's love for us, and then it becomes a Yom Tov. But when the fast day calls on Shabbos, the Eibishter is saying, this year, today, now, you cannot focus on even the tshuva aspect of the Tanis. You have to focus on the Mashiach aspect of the Tanis. Anyway, the problem with the Shleima, the Rebbe zugesagt wird sicher sein. Okay, Rabbi said, let's learn Tanya. Bevakasha bitte, we're learning Tanya. Perikov Beis, chapter 22, Perikov Beis. Perikov Beis begins in a funny way. It starts mamish in the middle of a sentence. Mamish. In the middle of a sentence, you have in Pashas Pinchas what's called Piska be'emtza pasuk. That in the middle of a pasuk you have a break, yeah? This is mamish Piska be'emtza pasuk. The Alter Rebbe is in the middle of talking, and he decides to start a new Perek. Why he does this, he didn't tell me. I have svaris, I have theories, but he mamish starts off the new Perek, mamish in the middle of a sentence. What is the sentence we're talking about? The sentence we're in the middle of is called Tzimtzum. When the Eibishter created the world, he created a process of Tzimtzum. And I have a great and a terrible story about Tzimtzum, which I'm going to tell you. You'll cover the 9 days. You'll have a way that's mutter that you're allowed to laugh. There was a good Yid, Molech says even Asach Rebbes. And a lot of these Rebbes were Einiklach. The Zayde gewen a Rebbe, and the Einiklach hat a Schiel. There were some Tzadikim, gute Yidden, gehäubene Menschen, weil Madrege. And then you have people who have Chusavis, the Zayde gewen a Rebbe, the Tate gewen a Rebbe. I heard about the Divrei Chaim, maybe also about the Ruzhan, that he wanted all those Einiklach to be Rebbes. Not because he thought the whole royal is instantly, he says, but to be Rebbes, at least to be Shem Shabbos. I mean, Ad Kedekach. See, there are all kinds of Gute Yidden. I mean, in America, there was an industry, Rebbes. I don't think it's the same anymore, but they see with Shenis. But anyway, the Yid who came to the Frierdiker Rebbe, thought Gehaisna Rebbe, The Rebbe once said, I heard it myself from the Rebbe, a Rebbe mit Alamid, a Rebbe, and he came into Friedrich Rebbe, weißt doch, anwünschen sagt, weißt doch, his baruch or levarech, to give brachas and to receive brachas. Anyway, he came into the Friedrich Rebbe. The Friedrich Rebbe upon him understood with them in Hatzatah. The Friedrich Rebbe was very gracious, but the Friedrich Rebbe understood that this is not b'diuk ben gila, that's nicht punkt derselbe Sach, you know. So he came in and he gave brachas, and the Rebbe answered amen, and then the Rebbe gave him brachas, and then he says to some Rebbe, the Rebbe geret Shabbos. The Rebbe spoke on Shabbos. He says, "Yo, the Rebbe, was it the Rebbe geret?" The Friedrich Rebbe didn't want to answer him. A maimer, a mame. Was it the geret mame? What did the Rebbe talk about in the mame? He says, "It's the geret wegen Tzimtzum." That Panus ist take betzimtzum. Das mega sagen that I don't even know who this is, which is why I can tell the story. I heard it from a friend of mine who was a big Baal Maaseh. In other words, I think the story is true. But as long as I don't know with whom it occurred, it's a harmless, panus, tzimtzum, it's a verschiedene certain tzimtzum, panus ist take betzimtzum. Anyway, we're not talking about that tzimtzum. We're talking about the tzimtzum that the Eibishter Kvayachol made in order for there to be a world, tzimtzum. Now we have this big overriding idea, this overarching idea, which is called tzimtzum shaloi kipshute, that nothing is really actual. Everything is the Eibishter, everything is called about Moshe, ein eid milvadei, achtos Hashem, says everything is Elokus. But we're not talking about that point. That we talked about at the beginning of the last Pedic and the Pedic before. We're talking from the perspective that we have. Right? Ve'ein hashinui ela ala makablim me'ita yizbarach. Ein hashinui ela makablim. To the Eibishter, everything is not real. Everything is Eibishter. To us, the Eibishter made a one-way mirror, right? To us, we exist, and to him, we're him. It's a very interesting and intensely complicating idea to think about us, especially when we think about us as having free will, b'chira chavshis, because we have a kavanah. The Eibishter gave us a mandate. The Eibishter gave us a mission that we have to do. Right? Lasses leyes baruch nibetachtein to make this lowest world home for Hakadosh Baruch Hu, to bring Mashiach Tzedkenu b'peil mamish or b'his galus b'makabel pnei Mashiach Tzedkenu. And you scratch your head and say, if there's nothing besides for God, exactly who am I? What am I doing? It's complicated. It's very, very complicated. But the complexity is real. That even though the Gabe the Eibishter, ein eid movade, if we knew, if Ilu, I'll tell you this in Tanya Sharichot, Ilu nit nur shus layin lereisa, the Eibishter would open up our eyes and allow us to see how he sees the reality, we would see that there's ein eid movade. But the other point of view, which is ours, is true. It says we do exist. And in order for us to exist, is what's called tzimtzum, a series of tzimtzum. The first tzimtzum evacuates mokum. And again, and this is all ideas that we talked about. It creates space and removes elokus from that space and into that so-called cholo, that so-called emptiness, or mokum panui vanechi pinisi abayis. Eibishter evacuates pinui. He turns himself aside, he moves himself away, and creates a space that there should be able to be a world. From that perspective, we exist, and from that perspective that we exist is a chain, right? The whole, what's called a seder, a chain of worlds, higher levels and lower levels, and what separates the higher levels from the lower levels, it's called tzimtzum. The Eibishter Kvayachol reduces the sense of his presence more and more, and the more the Eibishter reduces the sense of his presence, the more we relate to ourselves rather than relate to him. There's three levels. That's what I told it to you. There's Elam Ein Sof. There are worlds. There are worlds. But the godliness is so strong that you almost don't see a world. There's Elam Eis Nivrayim. There are worlds that the godliness is so hidden that all you see is world. And in between those two, there's a tie, right? In the higher worlds, godliness wins, so the worldliness is hidden. In the lower worlds, worldliness hints and the godliness is concealed. The perfect world is what we call Atzilus. In between Ilmas Ein Seif and Ilmas Anivrayim is what's called Giliyavit. Godliness meets a world. The godliness does not bittle the world, but the worldliness does not hide the godliness. So if godliness meets the world, and the godliness is not so strong as to destroy the form of that world, and the worldliness is not so strong as to hide the form of that godliness, so it's a draw, it's a tie. When you have a tide, the world stands its ground, the godliness stands its ground, so they have to change. They can't overwhelm one another, they can't be mevatel each other, they have to change. And the change is called Gilui, that the Ein Sof has to reach the Keli, and the Keli should hear that there's Ein Sof. Because the Keli says, I'm not going away. And the Ein Sof says, I'm not going to hide. Higher than Atzilus, the Keli goes away. Lower than Atzilus, the Ein Sof hides. And Atzilus is a draw. And I told this to you last week at length, 2 weeks ago at length. That's why Atzilus is so important. Because Atzilus is called Gili Elikus, the revelation of godliness. Why is the revelation of godliness important? Because once the Eibush is revealed in one place, then the Eibush is revealed in another place, including here. Atzilus, the Eibush created. The Eibush created a world where Hashem, where godliness, Hashem, this is Begilui. And it sets up that La'asad Lavi, godliness is going to be revealed here also. But it's because there is already one level, Kvayacha, which the Eibush created, where godliness is revealed. So you have a chain of worlds. And what separates one world from the second world is called Tzimtzum. In the higher worlds, the godliness is stronger, so the worldliness is less. In the lower worlds, the godliness is weaker, so the worldliness is more. And this is called a chain of worlds. If it's a chain of worlds, it's a chain of tzimtzums, reducing and reducing and reducing and reducing, until Kvayachal, this world, it's the tachten, chain, tachten, lamata, amen, mole, klipa, bis into the achara. The Rebbe knows how to explain. It's handled, right? What it means, this, the lowest of all of the worlds. It can't be worse than this one, and on and on and on and on and on. So there's a series of tzimtzums. And at the end of the previous Perek, we started this conversation about tzimtzums. We're not finished this conversation, but we started the conversation. At the end of the previous Perek, I gave you 2 classes on it. We talked about the idea of what's called tzimtzumim of seder ishtalshalos, that Hashem makes the light less and less. But we only spoke about these tzimtzums in the higher worlds. If you were here 2 weeks ago, I called it the world of truth. When godliness is revealed, it's emes. Now, wie sagt man das edel? God is truer than godliness, right? Elokah is mer emes v'elokus. God is truer than godliness. Everybody understands that. But elokus is not sheket. Elokus is emes. And that's what we talked about. In this Perek, Chav Beis, we're going to talk about the end of the chain. And the end of the chain is the Eibush is going to continue this process of tzimtzums. The Eibush is going to continue this process of tzimtzums until he's going to create what you and I call klipa. What you and I call klipa. And klipa means it's covering over the Eibush. So this is the trajectory, this is the direction, this is where we're coming from, and this is where we're going to. And I'm going to repeat my repetition one more time, see if I can do it in a few seconds, so that it'll actually be a summary rather than a review. There is the overarching idea of Achdas Hashem. Everything is the Eibush. We're not talking about that. We're talking about our point of view. In our point of view, there is a world. And from our point of view, there is a world. There's a lot of levels. There's a chain. And what separates one world from another world is the measure of tzimtzum, how much the godliness is hidden, and therefore how much the worldliness is allowed to emerge. And we're mamish in the middle of a sentence. Mamish in the middle of a sentence, the Alter Rebbe stops and starts a new Perek. I was sat this morning to prepare the class, and I said to myself, when I was a kid, a married man with children, but compared to what I am now, I was a kid. When I taught Tanya, I didn't stop at the end of Chaf Aleph. I would always spill over into Chav Beis. In other words, if the world was perfect, 2 weeks ago, I would have actually started this. So I'm going to ask you to look inside and read with me. Perek Chav Beis Rak Nor V'Shedek. The only truth is, we're talking about tzimtzum, and we're explaining that if we knew what the Eibishter knows, we would say that none of these tzimtzumim occur. If you remember the Lashon, Havayahu halakim, the concealment and the revelation are from the same. Or Kadein Kamsa the Levushim Minei Ubei, like the snail, whose levush, his garment, his covering is one with him. So the truth is, Eineid Milvade, besides for the Eibishter there is nothing. But to us, there is a world. The Eibishter allows us to perceive ourselves as separate from him by his design. It may be true that if we knew what he knows, if we saw what he sees, we would see that the world doesn't exist. But he doesn't let us see that. He allows us to see that we do exist. And because he allows us to see that we do exist, from our point of view, we're real. So the Alter Rebbe says, wait, I have another secret for you. Rak nor v'den shahatoyra dibir b'lashon hayodam. That the Torah speaks in the language of man. What is the Alter Rebbe adding? Perikha Beis, beginning of the Perikh. Rak, it is only shahatera dibra b'lashon b'nayodam, that the Torah kill lashon b'nayodam, the Torah speaks in the language of man. What's the Alter Rebbe adding with this? So forgive me for being a nudnik. I have the Rishimis here. I have two versions of the Rishimis, the old version and the new version. On these words, Rak shahatera dibra b'lashon rabban, the Rebbe writes in the Tanya. Look up the commentary on Tanya, which is Vaistois, not from the Rabbeim, but it's from Adam Choshev. And he says a very gewaldige word. Why the Rebbe doesn't want to say it himself? He says, look at the Bir Matanya, that's itself a shaila. But the Rebbe says that it says from like this. Right? What's Teida's last name? Anybody know what's Teida's last name? Teida's last name is Emes. Teida's last name is Emes. Right? Reish Devorcha Emes. Bereshis, Bara, Likim, the Eibusha signs his name. Bereshis, the last letter of Bereshis is a Tov. The last letter of Bara is an Aleph. And the last letter of Likim is a Mem, is Asius. Emes. The Teda is Emes. The Teda doesn't lie. The Teda says the truth. So if it says in the Teda, Bereshis, Bara, Likim, Esa, Shemayim, Esa, Aris, in the beginning, God Almighty created the heaven and the earth. And then he goes on to describe all the steps of creation. There was a Sunday and a Monday and a Tuesday and a Wednesday and a Thursday and a Friday. And he saw that his world was perfect. What was the world missing? The world was missing menucha. Then the world not only has a perfect form as a place where people could work, last is the second, but it even has the idea that you can rest in this world, and somehow resting in this world is considered work. And Teda doesn't lie. Teda doesn't lie. So the Alter Rebbe starts off Chabez saying like this. There's Hashem's point of view. And Hashem's point of view is there's nothing besides the Eibishter. There's our point of view. And our point of view is we absolutely exist. He made us, but we absolutely exist. He says, guess what? Our point of view is written in Teda. Which means, however you're going to resolve this problem, and it's a very hard problem to resolve, two things are true. Not two things are true. One is true to the Eibishter, the other one is true to us. Because we could live a fantasy, we could live a lie. Two things are true. One is true to the Eibishter, and the other is true to the Eibishter's Teda. And when the Eibishter gave himself to us in the Teda, he didn't lie. I was in Russia 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. And I davened in the old man in Rosh Shul. And there was an old Yid, I think his name was Rabbi, but I'm not even sure anymore, who was frum the whole time. All those 70 years under the communists, he was frum. And he came to shul every day. And he was oftentimes the chazan, because there's not a lot of people who can go to the Yamid. And when he would say Brich Shmei is in Aramaic. Brich Shmei is a parashat from Zayir. You should know it's one of the most beautiful tefillahs we say. Brich Shmei, we say whenever we open up the Aron Kodesh to read the Torah, we say Brich Shmei. I've been in Chabad houses where they read the Brich Shmei in English. So I once got up after Kriyas HaTorah and I said, most people read this in Aramaic, yeah? You all read this together in English. Do you all believe everything you just said? That's what I asked them. And they didn't understand what I was talking about. Because they were reading the words in English, they weren't paying attention. Brich Shmei is a beautiful tefillah. And one of the things you say in Brich Shmei is the word kshoit. Kshoit in Aramaic either means beautiful or true. Emes. Elokah kshoit, the Eibishter is emes. Hiraisa kshoit, his Teda is emes. Neviyoyah kshoit, his prophets are emes. And serving him is emes. Kshoit. So this Yid in Moscow, when he would say kshoit, he said kshoit like it was the echad of Mesidus Nefesh. He said kshoit. Why? Because he knew that the KGB doesn't speak Aramish, you understand? When you heard him say kshoit, this was his act. He probably did this kshoit for 40 years. That when he davened in shul. But in the Soviet Union, davened in shul, you had to behave because there was always a gabbai, you understand? There was an agent of the state. But he didn't know Aramish, so he said kshoit, emes. He said emes with such a toikef, I always tell you the same thing, that in Ezras, in after Krishma, you say emes. In davening, the word emes does not appear very often. Because the word emes is a scary word. The word emes is a very earnest word. It's an awesome word. So where do you say emes? After Krishma, right? Hashem Elokeichem emes. And it says in Kisvei Arizal that from the end of Krishma till Shemini Esrei, you say emes 8 times. Emes. 4 times until Ezras and 4 times in Ezras. Emes. And the way the emes is written in the Siddur is that after the emes is a comma. Emes, comma. Emes, comma. Emes is a statement. It's true. It's never part of it's a statement. It's emes. It's emes. So Alter Rebbe says you should know the world is emes. The world is emes. The Alter Rebbe begins Perek Beis with a stipulation. You should know that even though, from the perspective of the Eibishter, Ein Eid Milvadi, nothing exists. The fact that you feel that you exist is not only how you feel; it's how Hashem wrote in the Torah, which means that our feeling is emes. And that's how Perek Beis begins. Rakir is only Shahatera Dibra Belosh Kelosh and Bnei Adam. The Torah speaks in the language of man, and speaking in the language of man means that the idea that the Eibishter created once upon a time there was no world, and then at one point in time, you can't really say one point in time, because when He created the world, He created time itself. So whatever at one point in whatever you want to envisage exists before time and before space, the Eibishter created the world. Torah says so it's emes. V'nikra b'Torah, it's called in the Torah. Deburei shel Mokeim Baruch Hu, the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, blessed be He. And it's called b'Shem Dibur Mamish. It's called by the word speech, as if it's actually speech. K'deburei shel Adam, like the speech of a person. And again, let's be very direct. And if the Torah says it, it's emes. You know the story. You got to hear this ma'aseh, okay? This one's not as funny as the last one. Aber von deswegen, a gute ma'aseh. It was a chassid who came to the Tzemach Tzedek. There's more than one story like this. These are stories brought in the Shemus of Chassidim. And he said to the Rebbe, Chab Sveikis in the Munah. I'm not sure that there is a God. I'm doubting my faith, my Eibishter, which is a very unsettling thing. It's very disturbing to hear that the first time from a student, I can assure you. And I've heard it more than once in my life. It's never pleasant. Even though you know so much that 99 out of 100 times, not 9 out of 10, 99 out of 100 times it has nothing to do with faith and has nothing to do with conscientious objection. It has to do with psychology, pashut, with people's moods. But you can't say that. Tell the person who's on over, no, you really do, you're just going through a bad day. That's very helpful, yeah? I've done that many times, by the way, to a great degree of failure. So a person doesn't believe in God, the seichel. It takes a long time to get seichel, I can assure you of that. It takes many, many years. Some people have it naturally, some people got to work on it. But this man came to the Tzemach Tzedek and said, Rebbe, Chab Sveikis Nemunah, that's what the Eibishter. So the Tzemach Tzedek says to him, Zog me, tell me. He said, da Kesed. So Russia has a Tsar. Kesed and Tsar is the same word. It's simply language, a Latin language versus a Slavic language. Kesed and Tsar has the same shadish. And of course, the root of the roots is what we know as Caesar. Caesar and Kesed and Tsar, Alpha Zelbavot. Tsar is spelled C-Z-A-R in English. The C is silent. It's the same word. It's Kesed, it's Tsar, it's Caesar. And you know what the resource of it is? That Julius Caesar was a Caesarean. His mother died in childbirth. They cut him out of her belly. So he became the Caesar. And from Caesar's Gevarn Hashem HaToyar, and that's what the word Kesed and Tsar and Tsar, it all means the same thing. It's brought a Tosfos, you know, it's a Tosfos in Gemara, in Chas, that the Kisari, the source of the word Caesar, Julius Caesar, is from this word which means a beten, a rechem, a stomach. So he says to this chassid, Sadak Kesed, is there a Tsar? He says, of course. And you understand, a person who lived in Russia in those times, you said the word Kesed, even in front of the Tzemach Tzedek, had to get matresel. You know, there was a real fear, whether it was a fear of fear or a respect, but he reacted. Yeah. So the Tzemach Tzedek says, "Man veiste? How do you know? You ever saw the Kesed? You ever saw the Tsar?" He says, "No." He says, "So maybe just like you're doubting the Eibishter because you never saw him, you should doubt the Kesed because you never saw him." So the Chassid says, Rebbe, my brother's a businessman and he doesn't live in a shtetl and he's traveled all over Russia and he was once in a big city and there was a parade, and in the parade a lot of very prominent people marched, and amongst the people marching in the parade was the Kaiser himself. Und Rebbe, mein Bruder ist nicht kein Lügner. Rebbe, my brother would not lie. My brother wouldn't lie. My brother told me, so the Kaiser, it's emes. So the Tzemach Tzedek says to his chassid, bin ich ein Lügner? Am I a liar? So the chassid got very upset. He says, Rebbe, God forbid, God forbid that the Rebbe should say a lie. So the Rebbe said to him, Poshet, gleib mir, so da Gott, ich hab ihm gesehen. Believe me, there's a God, the way your brother saw the king, I saw the Eibishter. The same measure of certitude. It's a sipur. Emes. Emes. Now why I told you the first story, I gotta tell you the second story also. Also, it's not related, but it's related. That a chassid came to the Tzemach Tzedek, and to the Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Chabs Fekes Namun, I'm not sure about the Eibishter. And he was upset. He was upset. He was a Chassidish Yid, and his doubts, his heaviness was bothering him. So the Tzemach Tzedek's reaction was very surprising. Tzemach Tzedek said, "No." So you have doubts. So he said, "Rebbe, Fekes Namuna. I didn't tell you that I started to eat Paltiel or Cholstam. I told you that I have doubts about the Eibishter. How could you say no?" So I said, "No." Okay, so you have doubts, Rebbe. So each time the Rebbe said no, the chassid was even more upset than the time before, until he was hysterical. Rebbe, how could the Rebbe say no? If as Fekes Namun, Tzemach Tzedek said, anybody who has doubts the way you do is God's a fine maimon. He got so upset that the Tzemach Tzedek made nothing of his Fekes Namun. So Tzemach Tzedek said, it's okay, continue to believe the way you believed until now. And my point of this is the word emes. Tate is emes. And emes is a very, very serious word. It's a very serious word. It's even hard to be misboinen in the word emes. And the Alter Rebbe says, I want you to know, when you read about Tzimtzum, which says that the world exists, it's not just this is our feeling. Torah says this, and if Torah says this, it has an emes. And let's just read a little bit more. Kidibure shel like the words of a person. Lefi shebe emes, again that word, because in truth, kahu, this is how it is. That derech, there is a path, there is a shvil, there is a kav, through which there is yeridas, v'hamshochas, achayes, letachtonim. There is a descent, and a bringing forward, and a revealing of life to lower and lower worlds. And in the process of descent and bringing forward and revealing light and life and energy to lower and lower worlds, there is a series of tzimtzumim rabbi. Many tzimtzumim. They translate tzimtzumim in English as contractions. I have no idea what contractions mean, but I don't have a replacement word. I don't know what contractions mean. To make less, diminutions. Vatsumim. And some of these, there's a lot of them, but some of them are very intense. That means they change in very real ways for the tzimtzum and after the tzimtzum. It's not a difference between a brighter shade of red and a darker shade of red. The difference is huge. Minim, miminim, shoinim, of all different types. So let's have three expressions: rabim, atzumim, and shoinim. Many, intense, and shoinim, different types. Lihibares mehem, and through the process of this incredible diversity of tzimtzumim, it creates bruim rabim, all different types of creations, minim, shoinim, and all different classes and categories. So the Alter Rebbe is saying that Torah says so, and if Torah says so, this is emes. And this is an important idea to consider, I guess more than anything else, in avodah, right? I always tell you the same things. I have no new material, by the way. I went in yeshiva and I lived my mashpiyim. I repeat it maybe in my own words. I have nothing new to say. I'm repeating the same things over and over again. I appreciate the fact that they still come and listen, but when we were bochum in yeshiva, we had mashpiyim, teachers. And our teachers also had teachers. And their teachers also had teachers. Till Lubavitch and till Temchet Mimim and Lamayla B'Kodesh, yeah? And part of our culture, of the Chabad way of life, is that there are certain conversations that never end. Like everything else in life, if it's something that's real, you continue to talk about it. You don't have a discussion and you finish it and it's over. You go to a Rav, you ask a Shaila, you paskins, and you do it. I had a very unfortunate situation recently where someone sent me a question, an emotional question, which I had to answer in private. They went to a Rav, and the Rav gave them a psak din, and they did what the Rav said, and they're eating their hearts about it. They can't forgive themselves for it. They're not saying the Rav was wrong. They can't live with the teitzah of that psak din. Yeah. Such things happen. Most people, you go to a Rav and say, can I eat it? Can I not eat it? I opened up the pot of my soup on Shabbos on the fire. Can I eat the soup? Can I eat the soup? It's also a very powerful story. My great grandfather's name was Rabbi Alevi Levin. He was called Rabbi Nevle. He was a big chassid. My father, Zogazun Zayin, tells me the story all the time. He wasn't there, but he remembers the story like as if he was there. Rabbi Nevle was a big god. He was an incredible big lamb. Nigla and Chassidus. He was a big oivet. He was a big Yerei Shamayim. He was a very God-fearing man. And they were in Pucking. They were in Germany, and they were living on other people's. They had nothing. They were living in these barracks, and whatever they had was given to them. And there was they were not allowed to shecht upon them. They were not allowed to do business on the side. And somebody got hold of a chicken or a cow. I don't know what it was. The Yisrael was a sheichet. And the Yisrael did the shechita, and then they heard people coming from the official people. If they would catch him doing shechita, they could put him in jail. Because it was, as long as they were living on the dole, they were not allowed to do anything private. And the meat that they gave them, they couldn't eat. So they ran into some kind of a hideout for a minute, a mamish 60 seconds. Then those people went away. So they came out, the animal had already been geshecht. I don't know if it was a bird or if it was a behemoth. And they butchered it. And people had a little flesh, which was an incredible novelty for them. I heard also from my father that Rabbi Nevler had a lot of Avos Yisrael. And when he was doing a shechita, he would go around to the Almonis. There were a whole bunch of Lubavitcher women who had no husbands. And he would whisper to them, there's going to be a shechita, so they should have a head start, that their children should have a little bit of flesh. This was who he was. I heard it from my father, but I heard it from the people who experienced this. They butchered the meat, and they all ate the meat, and then the besos, in cup. It's Bosash and Salam Ayin. Bosash and Salam Ayin means that meat, if you don't watch it constantly, you're not allowed to eat. Because you're afraid that someone replaced it with a different piece. It's a halach and shulchan aruch. Bosash and Salam, it's similar to cholavakim. For milk to be kosher, you have to watch the milking. So of course, the solution to this practically is chaysim of the michaysim. When we send meat, we send it with a double seal. That double seal is very important in halach. You have to have a plumber on the behema, and then you have to have a plumber on. That's why you have these, you get a box of chicken. It has a tape which says in it Kranite kosher. That's not just decoration or an advertisement. That's a din. If it doesn't have that sticker, you can't eat the meat. And he already gave the meat out, and he now, if he had gone to a Rav under those conditions, what would the Rav have said? I would imagine the Rav would have said kosher. But he didn't think. They were so under the duress, and they were so poor, and there was a little bit of meat. It wasn't like they were all eating zevach mishpacha, eating fleish azay every day. He was ois mensch. And he wrote about the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote him what apparently, I think this letter is printed. I don't know if it's an Igris, but he wrote him a sharp letter. What's with Ivda? You learn to Chassidus, you learn to Tem Chetmimim, that Yid has to serve Hashem b'simcha, you have to stop it. And he couldn't. I think there was even more than one. The Rebbe was upset with him. No, but the Frierdiker Rebbe said Luz. Meaning to say, did you do right or you do wrong? It's a question. But going forward some people say that this killed him. He passed away in Pucking. He never made it to Paris. Rabbi Sol never. And he was a Yid Bal Yisurim. He had suffering in his lifetime for 100 people. His life was a very big chassid with a lot of Avos Yisrael and in a lot of simcha, but he had a terribly hard life. I mean, my father didn't know his mother. His mother was Rabbi Sol Neville's daughter, as an example. For example. So he had many, many tzars, but some people say that he couldn't get over the Agmas Nefesh, and the Rebbe wrote him, stop it, Nazayim B'Simcha, yeah. Couldn't, you can't. So this man wrote me a letter that he asked the Rav a Shaila, and the Rav Paskin, and he did what the Rav said, and now he can't. And I had to, what am I going to tell him? I said to him, I don't understand you. You asked the Rav, and you did what Torah says. Do you believe in the Torah? I believe in the Torah. If the Torah doesn't come from the Eibishter, why'd you ask him? If you believe the Torah comes from the Eibishter, and the Eibishter said you should ask a Rav, and you asked the Rav, this Rav Paskint. But when it's an emotional issue, it's hard to get over, right? But in 99.9% of the cases, you go to a Rav and you ask a Shaila, and the Rav says kosher. The Rav says, hey, fine. Occasionally, in rare instances, you have situations that you know the psak and you know it's right, but you're not happy about it. You can't rest. You can't through, and it doesn't leave you alone. Huh?
Sometimes it's because we ask the Rav, like the Rav will answer based on
So in other words, the Rav is a fool.
No.
Yeah. And you fooled him. The Rav heard what you said. And he paskent.
Maybe you didn't give enough information.
Maybe. So the Rav should have asked. The Rav gave you a psak din, laws. I said to this person that the Rebbe was so often disappointed by people. In some cases, the Rebbe's disappointment by people cost lives kipshute. People died because they didn't listen to the Rebbe. The Rebbe did not have a second to look back. Not a second. I saw a film, and this is what I said to this person. I saw a film where someone comes to the Rebbe with a Besura Teva that Arik Sharon Olav HaSholem is making his biography. And in his biography, he's admitting that the Rebbe was right about the Barlev line. The Barlev line cost Israel hundreds of boys. Kibshute. The Rebbe was so upset. I mean, I wasn't around, but I heard from people. The Rebbe used to sit by Fabegin and cry. Madua Bossi Ve'inish Karosi Ve'ineh. Quoting the pasuk from Yeshaya. I'm coming and there's no men. I'm calling and no one is responding. The Rebbe said, I was in France and I went to examine the Maginot Line. The Rebbe said, I went myself to look at it. And we all know what the Nazis did to the Maginot. The Rebbe was so upset. This went on for 2 years, 1972, 73. We know what happened in the Yom Kippur War. So Sharon Arik admitted that the Rebbe was right. So someone comes to the Rebbe by dollars. It's all public. With a Besura Teva. He's public his biography and he's going to write that the Rebbe was right. The Rebbe didn't even let him finish. He says, that's not what's important. What's important is what I'm saying now. This is today. And I'm giving directions now. Are you listening now? He didn't even let him finish. It was so not negaya. He was so unimportant. Anyway, that's the word, yeah? But we don't have time to look back. We made a mistake. And the Rebbe was very often disappointed. But the Rebbe did not have a second to dwell on the past. What's next? Why? Because that's the only thing that matters. That's the only thing that matters. Anyway, here's my point. My point is that most questions, you ask them, you answer them, and you move on. And some questions are rhetorical. You ask it, and you ask it, and you ask it, and you ask it, because the answer is never satisfactory. You have a question, you have an answer, but it doesn't answer the question. When I was a kid growing up, so there was a Chalket from Adam Mashpiyim. I don't know from whom I heard it. I don't remember. Somehow I tell myself all the good stuff that I remember I heard from the Mendel for the fast, but I don't remember. That the says, Chassidische word. It's not a lomdische word. It's not a correct word. It's a hatz word. It's a Chassidische word. The Tzemach Tzedek published my mom with Alter Rebbe L'kutei Torah. L'kutei Torah and Torah together is close to 400 Maimorim. I think it's very big. It's a lot. How many Maimorim begin with the same question? How many times do you have in the L'kutei Torah, why did the Eibush bring the neshama into this world? And there's not that many answers. It's for Vedas Abirurim, it's for Tshuva, it's for Nisyenes, it's for Dirib Tachtenim. There's not 100 answers, but the question is asked 100 times. You can learn the L'kutei Torah, ask the question, gives an answer. Go to the next same question again. So Chassidim used to say in the old days, I don't understand, Rebbe, you asked me the question. You gave me the answer. Move on to another question. Why same question again? So the Chassidim flagen sagen, Chassidim used to say that man gefragt a hart kashe und gegeben a kop teretz. You ask a question with your heart and you're trying to answer it with your mind. It's impossible. Can't do it. The mind understands the mind understands the mind understands the mind understands tshuva, the mind understands whatever. There's not that many answers. There's not 100 answers, there's a few answers. But the heart is not accepting it. Not some Rebbe said in the last hours of his life that he heard a voice from heaven, what is such a great soul doing in such a lowly world? What do you mean? You put him there. And you know why you put him there. So why are you asking? Because you're not asking the question because you don't know the answer. You're asking the question because the question never goes away. It's a shayla chezeres. It's a rhetorical question. It asks itself again and again and again and again. Anyway, let me get to the point, right? Let me get to the point. Chassidim have been asking for 250 years, does the world exist or does the world not exist? And the Golos HaKeseres, so to speak, the heart of this question is the famous Maimah from the Rebbe Marash Micha Meicha, which the Rebbe Marash said 18 times. He was the Rebbe for 18 years. He said it many times. I think he said it many times. I think 18 times. And someone made it a shima of how many times did the Maimah. The Micha Meicha Maimah, the Rebbe Marash, it's officially Tafish Chavtes, but you have it from Chavav, asks the question. Yeah, Welt, nicht Welt. If there's Achdas Hashem, there's no world. If there's no world, so where is our free will? Where's our Teda mitzvahs? Where's our Schar ve'enish? And you have to make them both right. That on the one hand there's Achdas Hashem, Ein Oin Mulvade, besides the Eibishter there's nothing. And on the other hand there's a world. V'harayeh, the Eibishter gives a Teda. And the Teda is emes. Teda is emes, Teda is true. If Teda is true, it's speaking truth. And the truth is saying, Hezachain, I made you. You exist, and I kvayochel atzmus the Musa and say, but says to me and to you, I need you to do this because kvayochel I can't do it for myself. I can't do it for myself. You have a mashal in Chassidus about a king. Kings can do certain jobs, but if there's a mess on the floor, the king can't pick it up. For this, he needs a servant, a evet. It's put in samachvov, miknerav. That there is some job as pasnished. A king cannot do it. He has to have a servant doing it for him. The Eibishter says, I made the job that I cannot do, kvayachol. This I need you to do for me. And of course, when we do it, the Eibishter says, I did it. But that's a detail, yeah? So, do we exist or do we not exist? If there's Shema Yisrael, Avaya Lekan, Avaya Chod, Ein Eid Muvadeh, so we don't exist. But if we have to learn Teda, what's the answer? They're both true. How can they both be true? That question is also true. And Chassidus has been exhausting itself for 250 years trying to answer that question. There are a lot of answers, and some of them are not bad, yeah? But the question is still there, because it's hard to wrap your mind around. So the Alter Rebbe is not giving answers, he's telling you the truth. I want you to know, getting to the point, in other words. The point of today's class is that everything we learned last week and 2 weeks ago about the idea of tzimtzum is not only our perception, it's emes, because it's written in the Torah. Period, that's all I taught you. I managed to spend 47 minutes and 43 seconds making one point, and that's the point. Okay, and I'm going to read it one more time, and then we're going to break. Okay, it is only. This is not just your perception and my perception. The Torah says that this is true. In the Torah, creation is called the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, blessed be He, b'shem dibur mamish, as though the Eibishter spoke, like the speech of a person. Now, what do we know about human speech? Human speech exists because there's an atmosphere, because there's space. I'm standing here, you're sitting across this room, and my words are leaving my lungs, leaving my mouth, and they're reaching you. If there was no space, if I was everything, yeah, how could you speak? Who are you talking to? And into where are you speaking? The Eibishter created the world through speech. If the Eibishter created the world through speech, there's got to be an over there. There has to be a mokim, a space into which he's speaking. And if Torah says the Eibishter creates the world through speech, Torah is nish kaligner. Lefisha be'emes kachu, because this is actually true. Derech, through this path of Yeridas, v'amsholchas achai, is bringing down and bringing forward and revealing light and life. The tachtenim, the lowest worlds. Now we turn to page 54. B'tzimtzumim rabim, with many contractions. va'atzumim, and intense contractions, minim shainim of all different types. Lehibares mehem, that through the process of these tzimtzumim, the Eibishter brings forward into creation. You want to translate colloquially, lehibares means zu machen gesund, to make healthy, bruim rabim, healthy beings, minim shainim of all different types. This is the other side of the coin. It's taka true, einid mavade, but it's taka true that Bereishis bara Elokim is Shemaim v'Saaretz, and He created us and He gave us a Torah and we have a task. And then He continues, v'kol kach, and to such a degree is the govru v'otzma tzimtzumim. These tzimtzumim are so strong and so intense. V'hester ponim hayenim, and the hiding of Hashem's face. Ache yuchlu le'savas olibad, as Hashem creates, and I'm going to use this again, this colloquial term, and makes healthy gam dvarim tmeim klipis. Okay, you'll have to come back next time for this. If you want to learn about klipping, you have to come back in 2 weeks. If you don't want to learn about klipping, don't come back in 2 weeks. Okay, we're going to break for a minute and we're going to learn Hayom Yom. I thank you all for coming.